Rebecca Martinez pushed her industrial broom across the oil-stained concrete floor of Hangar 7 at Riverside Municipal Airport. The massive space echoed with each scrape of bristles against concrete. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and she was alone with the shadows cast by a dozen private aircraft. What she didn't know was that in exactly 12 minutes, her carefully constructed new life would begin to unravel because of a single toolbox she'd forgotten to hide.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca had been working the night shift at Riverside Municipal for 3 months now. The job was perfect: minimal human contact, decent pay, and most importantly, no background checks beyond the basics. She'd learned to move through the hangars like a ghost, cleaning around million-dollar aircraft while their owners slept peacefully in suburban mansions. The airport sat on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Nevada, a town small enough that everyone knew everyone, except for Rebecca. She'd appeared one day in early spring, rented a studio apartment above Murphy's hardware store, and started showing up for work with a punctuality that impressed even the hard-to-please facility manager, Dale Henderson. Tonight felt different, though. Rebecca had noticed it the moment she'd clocked in. There was tension in the air, whispered conversations between the day shift mechanics that stopped abruptly when she walked past. Something was happening, but Rebecca had learned long ago not to ask questions that might invite questions in return. She worked systematically, starting with the smaller aircraft near the entrance and moving deeper into the hangar. Her routine was precise: sweep debris, wipe down surfaces, empty trash bins, check that all equipment was properly secured. It was mindless work that left her thoughts free to wander, though she tried to keep those wanderings in the present tense. The Cessna Citation in Bay 4 belonged to Richard Blackwood, a tech entrepreneur who'd made his fortune in cybersecurity. Rebecca knew this because she'd overheard mechanics discussing the plane's sophisticated electronic systems. She also knew Blackwood had been asking questions about airport security protocols, which explained why additional cameras had appeared in corners she'd thought were blind spots. As she swept around the Citation's landing gear, her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Package delayed. Maintain position. J. Rebecca's blood ran cold. She glanced around the empty hangar, suddenly aware of how exposed she was under the harsh fluorescent lights. The message should have been impossible. Only 3 people had this number, and 2 of them were supposed to be dead. She deleted the message and forced herself to continue working, but her movements became mechanical, her mind racing through possibilities she'd hoped never to consider again. Rebecca Martinez was supposed to be invisible, forgettable, just another minimum wage worker grinding through night shifts to pay rent. 20 minutes later, she heard the side door to the hangar creak open. Heavy footsteps echoed across the concrete, work boots with steel toes moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged here. Rebecca didn't look up from her sweeping, but every muscle in her body tensed. Didn't expect anyone to be here this late. The voice belonged to Marcus Thompson, one of the senior mechanics. He was a tall man in his 40s, with grease-stained coveralls and intelligent eyes that missed very little. Rebecca had made it a point to avoid extended conversations with him, sensing he was the type who remembered details others overlooked. "Just finishing up Bay 7, Rebecca replied, keeping her voice steady and disinterested. Marcus nodded and moved toward his workstation, but Rebecca could feel him watching her in her peripheral vision. She continued sweeping, fighting the urge to look over her shoulder. The mechanic busied himself organizing tools, the metallic clinks and clanks echoing through the space. Rebecca tried to focus on her work, but something felt wrong. Marcus Thompson had no reason to be here at 3 a.m. unless something unusual was happening. That's when she made her mistake. Rebecca had been carrying her personal toolbox in her cleaning cart since her second week on the job. It was a small, battered metal case that she used for minor repairs around her apartment. Loose screws, broken hinges, the kind of maintenance tasks that landlords in cheap buildings rarely bothered with. She'd grown so accustomed to having it with her that she'd stopped thinking about what it might reveal to an observant eye. As she maneuvered her cart around the wing of a Piper Archer, the cart's wheel caught on an uneven section of concrete. The jolt sent her toolbox sliding across the cart's surface, and it hit the concrete with a sharp clang that seemed to echo forever in the cavernous space. Rebecca immediately crouched to retrieve it, but not before the toolbox had popped open, spilling its contents across the hangar floor. Standard tools mostly, screwdrivers, pliers, a small hammer, but also items that didn't belong in a janitor's kit. A tension wrench, lockpicks, a small digital device that looked suspiciously like a frequency scanner. More damaging than the tools themselves was the toolbox itself. As Rebecca scrambled to collect the scattered items, she realized the worst had happened. The impact had jarred loose a piece of electrical tape she'd used to cover something she'd hoped no one would ever see. Marcus Thompson was already walking over, drawn by the commotion. "You okay over there?" he called out, but his tone had changed, more alert, curious. Rebecca stuffed tools back into the box as quickly as she could, but she wasn't fast enough. Marcus had stopped directly behind her, and she could sense him staring down at what she was desperately trying to hide. Stamped into the metal on the back of the toolbox, partially revealed where the electrical tape had peeled away, were two words that changed everything. Ghost Protocol. The phrase was etched in military standard lettering, the kind of official marking that couldn't be faked or accidentally acquired. Below it, barely visible in the poor lighting, was a serial number and what appeared to be a classification code. Rebecca's hands stilled for just a moment, long enough for Marcus to get a clear look at what she'd been trying to hide. When she finally looked up at him, she saw recognition dawning in his eyes.
Marcus Thompson wasn't just a mechanic. The way he'd positioned himself, the alertness in his posture, the fact that he was here in the middle of the night, it all suddenly made perfect sense. He'd been watching her, waiting for exactly this kind of mistake. "Rebecca Martinez," he said slowly, and the way he pronounced her name made it clear he knew it wasn't real. "I think we need to have a conversation." Rebecca stood up slowly. The toolbox clutched against her chest like a shield. Around them, the hangars seemed to have grown larger and more threatening. The aircraft loomed like metallic monuments to secrets she'd hoped to leave buried. Marcus reached into his coverall pocket and pulled out a small device that looked remarkably similar to the frequency scanner that had spilled from her toolbox. He pressed a button, and Rebecca heard the telltale whine of electronic countermeasures activating. "The hangar's clean now," he said. "No surveillance, we can talk freely." Rebecca's mind raced through her options. The nearest exit was 40 feet away, but Marcus stood between her and escape. Even if she could reach the door, where would she run? Her apartment was compromised the moment he'd seen the toolbox. Her carefully constructed life in Cedar Falls was over. "Who are you?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Someone who's been looking for a ghost for a very long time." "Agent Sarah Chen," Marcus said, extending his hand in a gesture that seemed almost mockingly formal given the circumstances. "Defense Intelligence Agency. And you're definitely not Rebecca Martinez." Sarah stared at his outstretched hand, but didn't take it. The name felt strange on her tongue after months of answering to Rebecca, but there was no point in maintaining the charade now. "How long have you known?" "About 6 weeks. Your cover was good, better than most, but you made one mistake." Marcus lowered his hand and leaned against the wing of the Piper Archer. "You're too competent. Real janitors don't notice when security cameras get repositioned. They don't instinctively avoid blind spots. And they definitely don't assess escape routes every time they enter a room." Sarah felt a familiar weight settling in her chest, the exhaustion that came with blown covers and burned identities. "So what happens now? You call it in, I disappear into a black site, and everyone pretends Rebecca Martinez never existed. That depends on whether you want to hear what I'm really doing here." Marcus pulled out a tablet from his tool bag and powered it on.
The screen displayed a satellite image of the airport with heat signatures and movement patterns overlaid in different colors. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, identify potential threats, calculate odds of survival. But something in Marcus's tone made her pause. He wasn't positioning himself like someone preparing to take a prisoner. If anything, he seemed to be positioning himself as an ally. 3 weeks ago, Marcus continued, swiping through images on the tablet, a cargo manifest disappeared from the port of Long Beach. Nothing unusual there. Paperwork gets lost all the time. Except this particular manifest listed components that, when assembled correctly, could level half of downtown Los Angeles. The tablet showed shipping containers, customs documentation, and what appeared to be chemical formulas. Sarah recognized some of the compounds from her training at Quantico, back when she'd been someone else entirely. The cargo was tracked to a warehouse in Barstow, but by the time a team got there, everything was gone. No forwarding address, no paper trail, nothing. Like it had simply vanished. Marcus looked up from the tablet. But cargo doesn't just vanish. It gets moved. And the most efficient way to move sensitive cargo out of Southern California without triggering federal attention is through small regional airports.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sarah processed this information while simultaneously cataloging everything in her immediate environment that could be used as a weapon. The toolbox in her hands had enough metal to do serious damage if necessary. A pneumatic lift control was within reach. The aircraft around them provided both cover and concealment. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because whoever's running this operation is good. Military-grade operational security, sophisticated counter-surveillance, the kind of tradecraft that suggests government training. Sound familiar?" Marcus powered down the tablet. "We've been monitoring this airport for 2 weeks. Cargo comes in, gets transferred to smaller aircraft, and disappears into the night. But we can't get close enough to identify the players without compromising the investigation. And you think I can? I think you're already closer than we've managed to get in months of trying." Marcus gestured around the hangar. "You have legitimate access, you've established a routine, and most importantly, you're invisible. Nobody suspects the night janitor of being a threat." Sarah set her toolbox down on the cart, buying time to think. The smart play was to walk away, finish her shift, pack her few belongings, and disappear before dawn. She'd done it before, in Prague, again in Manila, and twice in Eastern Europe. New identity, new city, new life built on the ashes of the old one. But something about Marcus's proposal intrigued her. For 3 months, she'd been running from shadows, hiding from people who might or might not still be looking for her. The thought of actively working against something, of using her skills for a purpose beyond mere survival, was unexpectedly appealing. "What makes you think I'm not part of whatever operation you're investigating?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "Because if you were, you wouldn't be working night shifts for $12 an hour. Whatever brought you to Cedar Falls, it wasn't part of anyone's master plan." He wasn't wrong. Sarah's arrival in Nevada had been pure desperation, the last stop on a journey that had started in a safe house in Bucharest and taken her through half a dozen cities where people asked too many questions or remembered faces too well. Cedar Falls was supposed to be the place where Sarah Chen finally died, and Rebecca Martinez lived out a quiet, anonymous life. But something about Marcus's proposal intrigued her. For 3 months, she'd been running from shadows, hiding from people who might or might not still be looking for her. The thought of actively working against something, of using her skills for a purpose beyond mere survival, was unexpectedly appealing. "What makes you think I'm not part of whatever operation you're investigating?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "Because if you were, you wouldn't be working night shifts for $12 an hour. Whatever brought you to Cedar Falls, it wasn't part of anyone's master plan." He wasn't wrong.
Sarah's arrival in Nevada had been pure desperation, the last stop on a journey that had started in a safe house in Bucharest and taken her through half a dozen cities where people asked too many questions or remembered faces too well. Cedar Falls was supposed to be the place where Sarah Chen finally died, and Rebecca Martinez lived out a quiet, anonymous life. But assuming I was interested, she said carefully, what exactly would you want me to do? Keep doing what you're already doing. Clean the hangars, stay invisible, don't change your routine, but keep your eyes open. Marcus pulled a small device from his pocket. It looked like a thumb drive, but Sarah recognized it as a short-range data transmitter. If you see anything unusual, document it. Aircraft that don't match their registration numbers, cargo being loaded outside normal hours, people who don't belong. And in exchange? In exchange, when this is over, the Defense Intelligence Agency will be very grateful. Grateful enough to make certain problems disappear. Marcus met her eyes. I don't know what you're running from, Chen, but I'm guessing it's the kind of problem that follows you everywhere you go. The kind that only gets worse with time. Sarah thought about the text message she'd received earlier. Package delayed. Maintain position. J. And felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Marcus was right about problems that follow you. Some shadows were too long to outrun. I need guarantees, she said. Full immunity, new identity, relocation assistance, and I want everything in writing. Done. Marcus didn't hesitate, which told Sarah that either he was authorized to make such promises or he was lying with remarkable confidence. But I need something from you first. Sarah waited. That toolbox, the ghost protocol marking, I need to know what that means. Sarah felt the weight of old secrets pressing against her chest. Ghost protocol wasn't just a classification level. It was a program, a project, a piece of her past that she'd hoped was buried deep enough to stay dead. It's complicated, she said. I've got time. Sarah looked around the hangar, at the aircraft that represented freedom and escape for their wealthy owners, at the concrete floor she'd been sweeping for 3 months while trying to forget who she used to be. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to trust her deepest secrets to a stranger in the same place where she'd been pretending to be nobody at all. Ghost Protocol was, she began, CIA, DIA, NSA, plus a few agencies that don't officially exist. The mission was to track and neutralize weapons of mass destruction before they could reach American soil. We operated without oversight, without official sanction, and definitely without congressional knowledge. Marcus nodded. Black ops. How black? Black enough that when things went wrong, everyone involved simply ceased to exist. No records, no pension, no acknowledgement that we'd ever served. Sarah picked up her toolbox again, running her fingers over the stamped letters that had given her away. The toolbox belonged to my partner, James Rodriguez. He was killed in Bucharest 6 months ago, along with the rest of our team. All of them? Supposedly, but someone sent me a message tonight. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Marcus the deleted text. Only 3 people knew this number. James was one of them. Our handler, David Park, was another. Both are officially dead. Marcus studied the phone screen. And the third person? Me. The hangar fell silent except for the distant hum of the airport's electrical systems. Sarah could see Marcus processing this information, calculating implications and possibilities. If your team was compromised in Bucharest and now someone's using your old communication protocols, then either one of your supposedly dead teammates is still alive or someone else has access to Ghost Protocol resources. That's what I'm afraid of. Marcus looked up at the security cameras positioned around the hangar. The countermeasures I activated, they're only good for another 10 minutes. After that, we're back on the record. Then we better make this quick.
The cargo I mentioned, the missing components from Long Beach. One of the shipping labels had a partial address, a warehouse in Barstow that was supposed to be the final destination. Marcus pulled up a photo on his tablet. But here's the interesting part.
The warehouse is owned by a shell company that traces back to a defense contractor called Meridian Solutions. Sarah's blood ran cold. Meridian Solutions was one of the companies that provided logistical support for Ghost Protocol operations, which means either this is an incredible coincidence or your past just caught up with your present in a very dangerous way. Marcus saved the files on his tablet and began packing up his equipment. I'm going to reactivate surveillance in 60 seconds. When I do, we go back to being strangers. You're the night janitor, I'm the mechanic who works late. But tomorrow night, you start looking for connections. Sarah nodded, her mind already shifting into operational mode. The comfortable numbness of her Rebecca Martinez identity was falling away, replaced by the sharp focus she'd learned in training facilities whose names were classified above her clearance level. "One more thing," Marcus said as he moved toward his workstation. "If I'm right about what's happening here, then the people responsible have already killed your entire team. They won't hesitate to add one more name to the list." "Let them try." Marcus smiled. "There's the ghost I was hoping to find." As the surveillance systems came back online, Sarah returned to her cleaning cart and began pushing it toward the next aircraft. To any observer, she was just Rebecca Martinez, finishing another boring night shift. But inside her head, Sarah Chen was coming back to life, and she was very interested in having a conversation with whoever thought her team was dead. The toolbox rattled against her cart as she moved, and for the first time in months, the sound didn't make her nervous. It sounded like a promise. Sarah's alarm buzzed at 10 p.m. the following evening, but she'd been awake for hours. The cramped studio apartment above Murphy's hardware store suddenly felt like a tactical disadvantage. One entrance, limited sightlines, nowhere to run if things went wrong. She'd spent the day researching Meridian Solutions on a burner laptop, using skills she'd hoped never to need again. What she'd found made her stomach turn. Meridian Solutions had been founded 8 years ago by former military contractors specializing in logistics and asset management. Their client list was classified, but Sarah recognized the pattern from her Ghost Protocol days. Shell companies layered on top of shell companies, funding streams that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes, contracts that officially didn't exist. More disturbing was what she'd found in the deep web archives. Meridian had been awarded several no-bid contracts for hazardous material disposal in Eastern Europe, specifically in Romania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine. The dates aligned perfectly with Ghost Protocol operations she'd personally conducted in those regions. Someone had been profiting from their missions while they risked their lives in the field. Sarah dressed in her usual work clothes, dark jeans, steel-toed boots, a jacket with enough pockets for the equipment she'd be carrying tonight. But instead of her normal cleaning supplies, she loaded her cart with items that would have raised serious questions in any legitimate custodial service. A tablet with facial recognition software, digital cameras disguised as cleaning equipment, signal detection gear that could identify encrypted communications, and most importantly, a small device that could clone keycards and access codes. The drive to Riverside Municipal Airport took 12 minutes, the same route she'd traveled for months without giving it much thought. Tonight, she noticed everything: traffic patterns, surveillance cameras, alternate escape routes. Her mind was cataloging details with the automatic precision of someone trained to survive in hostile environments. Dale Henderson was working late again, which wasn't unusual for a facility manager at a small airport. What was unusual was the way he kept glancing at his phone and checking the time. Sarah clocked in normally, exchanged pleasantries about the weather, and began her rounds. But she was watching Henderson through the security office windows as she worked. At 11:43 p.m., Henderson's demeanor changed completely. He straightened in his chair, closed whatever he'd been reading on his computer, and reached for a radio that Sarah had never seen him use before. The conversation was brief, but even from a distance, she could see the tension in his posture. Something was happening tonight. Sarah had just finished cleaning the administrative offices when she heard it: the low rumble of aircraft engines approaching from the east. She moved to a window and watched as an unmarked cargo plane descended toward the airport's main runway.
No lights except the minimum required for safety. No radio chatter on the frequencies she could monitor. The aircraft taxied directly to Hangar 12, the largest structure on the property, and one that had supposedly been empty for months. But as Sarah watched, the massive doors began to open, revealing interior lighting and what appeared to be several people moving around inside. She grabbed her cleaning cart and headed toward Hangar 12, her heart rate climbing with each step. This was exactly what Marcus had asked her to document, but it was also potentially the most dangerous thing she'd done since Bucharest. The side entrance to Hangar 12 was secured with a keypad lock, but Sarah had come prepared. The cloning device Marcus had given her worked exactly as advertised, capturing the access code when Dale Henderson punched it in 20 minutes later. Sarah waited until Henderson was inside before using the cloned access to slip through the door herself. The scene inside made her question everything she thought she knew about the situation. The cargo plane was unloading, but not with the military efficiency she'd expected. Instead, the operation looked chaotic, desperate. Men in civilian clothes were hauling wooden crates with barely controlled panic, sweat beading on their faces despite the cool night air. More troubling was what Sarah could see of the crates themselves: Cyric markings, Romanian customs stamps, and stenciled warnings in multiple languages about radioactive materials.
These weren't weapons components from the port of Long Beach. This was something much worse. Sarah positioned herself behind a stack of maintenance equipment where she could observe without being seen. She activated the recording function on her tablet and began documenting faces, license plates, aircraft registration numbers, anything that might help identify who was running this operation. That's when she saw him. David Park stepped out of the cargo plane's cabin, very much alive despite supposedly dying in a car bomb in Prague 2 months ago. He looked older, thinner, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. But it was definitely him, the man who'd recruited her for Ghost Protocol, who'd sent her team into situations that officially never happened. Sarah's hands shook as she zoomed in with the tablet's camera. If Park was alive, then the entire story about their team's elimination was a lie, which raised the question of who else might have survived and why they were now involved in smuggling radioactive materials through a small Nevada airport. Park was directing the unloading operation with the same meticulous attention to detail she remembered from their briefings. But there was something different about him now. A nervousness, an urgency that suggested this wasn't a planned operation so much as an emergency evacuation. "Careful with Crate 7, Park called out to one of the workers. "If that containment unit cracks, we'll all be glowing in the dark." Sarah felt ice water in her veins. The containment unit meant this wasn't just radioactive material, it was weapons-grade nuclear material, the kind that required specialized handling and storage. The kind that could level a city block if someone knew how to use it properly. She was so focused on documenting the operation that she almost missed the footsteps behind her. "Evening, Rebecca." Sarah spun around to find Marcus Thompson standing 5 feet away, but he wasn't wearing his mechanic's coveralls anymore. Instead, he was dressed in tactical gear, with a sidearm visible on his hip and what appeared to be a radio headset around his neck. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "Same thing you are, I suspect. Trying to figure out why your former handler is smuggling nuclear material through a municipal airport in the middle of the night. The question is, are you here to stop him or help him?" Sarah realized that Marcus's arrival wasn't a coincidence. "You've been tracking me all day." "Since you left your apartment. Sorry, but after last night's conversation, I couldn't take the chance that you might warn them off." Marcus glanced toward the cargo operation. "Though, based on what I'm seeing, I'm starting to think you're as surprised by this as I am." "Park is supposed to be dead. My entire team is supposed to be dead." Sarah showed Marcus the tablet screen. "This changes everything." "It changes some things, but not the fact that we're looking at enough fissile material to build several dirty bombs." Marcus pulled out his own tablet and began recording. The question is what they plan to do with it. Sarah watched Park directing his people with increasing urgency. He's scared. This isn't a planned operation, it's an emergency evacuation. Something spooked them. Or someone. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, her phone buzzed with another text message. Same, unknown number. Hangar 12. Come alone. We need to talk. Jay. Sarah showed the message to Marcus, who immediately reached for his radio. "Stand down," Sarah said quickly. "If that's really James, then he's been hiding for 6 months for a reason. If you call in backup, he'll disappear again. Or it's a trap designed to eliminate the one surviving member of your team." Sarah looked back toward the cargo operation. Park was checking his watch repeatedly, clearly waiting for something or someone. The workers were nearly finished unloading, which meant whatever was happening here would be over soon. 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes to see if James is really alive. If I'm not back by then, call in your team. Marcus didn't look happy, but he nodded. 5 minutes, but I'm tracking you the whole time. Sarah made her way deeper into the hangar, moving between aircraft and equipment toward the source of the text message. Her training told her this was exactly the kind of mistake that got agents killed, but her instinct said something else was happening here. She found James Rodriguez exactly where she expected to, in the shadows behind a maintenance truck, positioned where he could observe the entire operation without being seen. But the man she found barely resembled her former partner. James had lost at least 20 pounds. His face was scarred from what looked like burn injuries, and his left arm hung at an odd angle that suggested poorly healed breaks. But his eyes were the same. Sharp, intelligent, constantly assessing threats and opportunities. "Hello, Sarah. You're supposed to be dead. So are you." James glanced toward the cargo operation. "Though I'm guessing your death was more voluntary than mine." Sarah positioned herself where she could keep an eye on both James and the hangar activity. Bucharest was a setup. Worse than that, Bucharest was a cleanup operation. James pulled out a battered laptop and showed her a series of files. The files on the screen showed bank transfers, communication logs, and what appeared to be auction listings for classified information. Sarah recognized some of the mission codes from operations she had personally conducted.
Park's behind this? Park's trying to fix it. Those crates contain nuclear material that was stolen from a facility in Moldova 3 weeks ago. The thieves plan to sell it to the same people who've been buying our intelligence. James closed the laptop. Park's been tracking the material ever since, trying to intercept it before it reaches its final destination, which is Los Angeles, specifically the port of Long Beach, where it would be transferred to a cargo container and shipped to a buyer in the Middle East. Sarah processed this information while watching Park's operation wind down. So these are the good guys? There are no good guys anymore, Sarah. Just people trying to prevent the world from ending and people trying to profit from the chaos. James stood up slowly, favoring his injured arm. The question is which side you want to be on. Before Sarah could answer, the hangar's main lights suddenly blazed to life, illuminating every corner of the massive space. Park's people immediately went for their weapons, and Sarah heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from multiple directions. "Federal agents!" a voice boomed through loudspeakers. "This facility is surrounded. Drop your weapons and place your hands where we can see them." James looked at Sarah with something that might have been regret. "I'm sorry. I hoped we'd have more time to explain." "Explain what? Why you're about to become the most wanted fugitive in America." Through the hangar windows, Sarah could see tactical teams rappelling from helicopters, their movements coordinated and professional. This wasn't a hastily organized raid. It was a full-scale military operation that had clearly been planned for days or weeks, which meant someone had known this was going to happen. Someone had set them all up. The tactical teams breached Hangar 12 with textbook precision, but something was wrong with the entire operation.
Sarah had witnessed enough federal raids during her Ghost Protocol days to recognize the signs, and this one felt choreographed rather than urgent. The agents moved too slowly for a genuine nuclear threat. Their positioning suggested they were more concerned with controlling exits than securing dangerous materials. And, most tellingly, none of them were wearing radiation detection equipment despite dealing with weapons-grade nuclear material. Someone wanted this raid to look official while ensuring specific outcomes. James grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her deeper into the shadows behind the maintenance equipment. Listen carefully. In about 30 seconds, those agents are going to find a laptop in David Park's possession. That laptop contains fabricated evidence linking you to the theft of nuclear material from Moldova. That's impossible. I've never been to Moldova. Facts don't matter when the evidence is convincing. Bank records showing payments to Rebecca Martinez. Travel documents placing you in Eastern Europe last month. Communications between you and known weapons dealers. James's voice was urgent but controlled. Someone's been building a case against you for weeks. Sarah watched as Park surrendered without resistance, his hands raised while agents zip-tied his wrists. The man who'd once commanded one of the most secretive operations in American intelligence was being treated like a common criminal. Why frame me? I'm nobody. Rebecca Martinez is a janitor. Because Sarah Chen was Ghost Protocol's best operational asset. And someone needs her completely discredited before she can expose what really happened in Bucharest. James pulled out a small device that looked like a modified cell phone. The same someone who's been selling our intelligence. The same someone who ordered our team eliminated when we got too close to the truth. The device in James's hand suddenly lit up with incoming data, locations, names, financial transactions. Sarah recognized it as a military-grade intelligence gathering tool, the kind that could hack into secure networks and extract classified information in real time. Marcus Thompson, James said, reading from the screen. Defense Intelligence Agency, assigned to Operation Clean Sweep 3 months ago, with orders to identify and eliminate remaining Ghost Protocol assets. Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. Marcus is trying to kill me? Marcus is trying to frame you for nuclear terrorism so you can be eliminated with legal justification. Much cleaner than a car bomb in Prague. James showed her the device's screen, which displayed Marcus's real operational orders. He's been building Rebecca Martinez's false identity as a cover for Sarah Chen's criminal activities. Tonight was supposed to be your arrest for treason. Through the hangar's chaos, Sarah spotted Marcus near the main entrance, speaking into his radio with the calm professionalism of someone coordinating a successful operation. But he wasn't wearing federal tactical gear like the other agents. He was still dressed as a mechanic, maintaining his cover even during the raid. How do we prove I'm innocent? We don't. Innocence is irrelevant when the evidence against you is this comprehensive. James began packing up his equipment. We run, we hide, and we find the real traitor before they can finish what they started. The tactical teams were systematically searching the hangar, moving closer to their hiding spot with every passing minute. Sarah calculated distances to exits, assessed cover opportunities, and came to an unpleasant conclusion. There's no way out. They've got every exit covered. There's always a way out if you're willing to pay the price. James pointed toward the cargo plane, which was still running its engines despite the federal presence. Park's people aren't just smugglers, they're extraction specialists. That plane can be airborne in 90 seconds if we can reach it. Sarah looked at the aircraft, then at the dozen armed agents between them and escape. That's suicide. Staying here is suicide. At least this way we have a chance to find out who really killed our team.
James was right, but Sarah had spent 3 months building a quiet life in Cedar Falls, and the thought of throwing it away based on the word of a supposedly dead partner made her hesitate. Everything could be a lie. James's survival, the intelligence of Marcus, even the nuclear material itself. But then she saw Marcus pull out his tablet and begin typing, and she remembered the way he'd positioned himself during their conversation the night before.
the countermeasures he'd activated, the convenient timing of his arrival in the hangar. Marcus had known exactly when and where to find her because he'd been orchestrating the entire scenario. "Move," Sarah said. They slipped between aircraft toward the cargo plane, using the chaos of the raid as cover. Federal agents were focused on securing Park and his people, not watching for additional threats. But Sarah knew that would change the moment Marcus realized she wasn't where she was supposed to be. The cargo plane's crew was preparing for emergency departure, throwing equipment into the cabin and running through abbreviated pre-flight checks. They looked like the former military, efficient, focused, accustomed to working under pressure. James reached the aircraft first and spoke briefly with someone near the cargo ramp. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation over the engine noise, but the crew member's response was emphatic, gesturing toward the hangar exit. "Problem," James called back to her. "They're not taking passengers." Sarah assessed their remaining options, which were essentially none. The tactical teams had finished securing Park's operation and were beginning a systematic search of the entire hangar. In less than 2 minutes, they'd reached the cargo plane area. That's when she noticed something odd about the nuclear material containers. The crates that Park's people had been handling so carefully were still sitting near the cargo plane, apparently forgotten in the chaos of the raid. But federal agents dealing with genuine nuclear material should have been securing those containers first, not arresting smugglers. Sarah moved closer to examine the nearest crate, and what she found changed everything she thought she understood about the situation. The radiation warning labels were fake, high-quality counterfeits, but fake nonetheless. The Cyrillic markings were grammatically incorrect, the kind of mistakes made by someone who didn't actually speak Russian. And most damning, the crates themselves were too light for their supposed contents. This wasn't nuclear material, it was an elaborate prop in someone else's operation. "James," she called out, but when she turned around, her partner was gone. In his place stood Marcus Thompson, no longer pretending to be a mechanic. He was holding a sidearm pointed directly at her chest, and his expression suggested the friendly cooperation of the previous evening had been entirely fictional. "Agent Chen, I was hoping we could do this the easy way." Sarah kept her hands visible while scanning for escape routes. The cargo plane's engines were still running, but the crew had disappeared. The federal agents were still conducting their search, but none of them seemed to be looking at her direction. "Let me guess, you're about to tell me this is all for national security. This is about cleaning up a mess that should have been handled 6 months ago." Marcus kept his weapon trained on her while pulling out his tablet with his free hand. Ghost Protocol was compromised from the beginning. Enemy agents had infiltrated the program, were selling intelligence to hostile governments, and were planning terrorist attacks on American soil. "So you killed the entire team?" "We eliminated confirmed traitors and their collaborators. Unfortunately, some assets escaped the initial cleanup operation." Marcus showed her the tablet screen, which displayed what appeared to be surveillance footage of her activities over the past 3 months. Rebecca Martinez was a very convincing identity, but not convincing enough. Sarah realized that every aspect of her life in Cedar Falls had been monitored and recorded. Her apartment, her work routine, even her grocery shopping trips. Marcus hadn't discovered her identity through observation. He'd known who she was from the moment she'd arrived in Nevada. The nuclear material, Park's operation, tonight's raid, all of it was theater designed to get me here. All of it was necessary to establish legal justification for your elimination. Sarah Chen died tonight while resisting arrest for nuclear terrorism. Very clean, very official. Case closed. Marcus gestured toward the hangar's main area, where Park was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. Your former handler will spend the rest of his life in a Supermax facility, and the Ghost Protocol cleanup operation will finally be complete. Except, you made one mistake. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed his grip tighten on his weapon. Which is, you assumed I was the only survivor. The cargo plane's engines suddenly roared to maximum power, drowning out all other sound in the hangar. At the same moment, the building's lights cut out, plunging everything into darkness except for the red glow of emergency systems. Sarah hit the ground and rolled toward the nearest aircraft as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. Marcus's tactical teams were shouting into their radios, trying to coordinate a response to threats they couldn't see. In the darkness, Sarah couldn't tell which agents were real federal officers and which were Marcus's people, but the hesitation in their voices suggested they weren't sure either.
Marcus was speaking urgently into his radio, trying to regain control of the situation, but Sarah was already moving toward the cargo plane. The aircraft's crew had reappeared and were signaling for immediate boarding. She reached the cargo ramp just as James emerged from the shadows, carrying equipment she didn't recognize and wearing body armor that definitely wasn't standard issue for dead intelligence agents. "Time to go," he said, pulling her toward the aircraft. "What about Park?" Park was never the target. This entire operation was designed to flush out the real traitor. James handed her a headset as they climbed into the cargo plane. "Someone's been using Ghost Protocol resources to run unauthorized operations for personal profit. Someone with access to classified intelligence and the authority to order elimination operations." The plane was already moving as Sarah strapped herself into a seat near the cargo bay. Through the windows, she could see Marcus's tactical teams trying to organize pursuit, but the aircraft was accelerating toward the runway. "Someone in the Defense Intelligence Agency," James continued. "Someone who's been using the Ghost Protocol cleanup as cover for eliminating witnesses to their own crimes." As the plane lifted off from Riverside Municipal Airport, Sarah finally understood the scope of what they were facing. This wasn't about nuclear terrorism or foreign intelligence operations. This was about corruption at the highest levels of American intelligence, and she was now the primary witness to crimes that some very powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The question was whether they could stay alive long enough to expose the truth. Below them, Cedar Falls disappeared into the darkness, taking with it the quiet life of Rebecca Martinez and any hope Sarah had of remaining invisible. The cargo plane flew through the Nevada night at dangerously low altitude, its pilot using terrain following techniques to avoid radar detection. Sarah sat across from James in the dimly lit cargo bay, watching him work with equipment that seemed far too sophisticated for a supposedly rogue operation. "Where did you get military-grade jamming equipment?" she asked, gesturing toward the device that had cut power to the hangar. "Same place I got the plane, the crew, and the intelligence on Marcus Thompson's real mission." James looked up from a laptop displaying real-time satellite feeds. Ghost Protocol wasn't the only Black Ops program running unauthorized operations. Some of us learned to build contingency plans. The laptop screen showed their aircraft as a small blip moving across a digital map. But more concerning were the other blips converging on their position from multiple directions. Military interceptors moving fast and closing the distance. "They're scrambling F-16s out of Nellis Air Force Base," James announced to the crew through his headset. "ETA 12 minutes. The pilot's response crackled through the comm system. "Copy that. Initiating evasive maneuvers." Sarah felt her stomach lurch as the plane dropped into a steep dive, following the contours of the desert landscape. Through the small windows, she could see mountain peaks flashing past uncomfortably close to their wingtips. "This is insane. You're going to get us killed trying to outrun fighter jets in a cargo plane." "We're not trying to outrun them. We're trying to reach friendly airspace before they can shoot us down." James showed her the satellite feed, pointing to a section of the map highlighted in green. 12 minutes to the Mexican border. "If we can cross into international airspace, the rules of engagement change dramatically." Sarah studied the map, calculating distances and speeds. "That's assuming Mexico doesn't decide to shoot us down themselves. Mexico's gonna be too busy dealing with their own problems to worry about one cargo plane." James switched to a different screen showing news feeds from across the border. Someone leaked information about a major drug cartel operation happening tonight. Mexican authorities are focused about 200 miles south of where we'll be crossing. The convenience of this distraction struck Sarah as suspicious. "Let me guess, the same someone who provided you with this aircraft and equipment?" The same someone who's been planning for this moment since Ghost Protocol was first compromised. James closed the laptop and moved to a secured storage locker in the cargo bay. Sarah, what do you know about Operation Blackwater? Never heard of it, because it was classified above your clearance level. Blackwater was a joint CIA-DIA initiative to identify and eliminate corruption within American intelligence agencies. Ghost Protocol was one of their investigation targets. Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. You're saying the Ghost Protocol was always under investigation? We were being investigated while we were investigating others. Classic counterintelligence operation. James handed her a pistol and spare ammunition. The problem came when someone realized the investigation was getting too close to some very uncomfortable truths. So they ordered the team eliminated. They ordered the investigation terminated through extreme prejudice. But Blackwater had embedded assets in Ghost Protocol from the beginning. Assets who were supposed to die in Bucharest but managed to survive long enough to gather evidence. The plane shuddered as they hit turbulence, or possibly the wake from the pursuing fighter jets. Sarah checked her weapon automatically, muscle memory taking over despite months of civilian life. Evidence of what? James pulled out a data drive that looked like standard computer storage but had been modified with military-grade encryption hardware. Evidence that someone in the Defense Intelligence Agency has been using American intelligence resources to facilitate arms deals with terrorist organizations. Not prevent them, facilitate them. The implications hit Sarah like ice water, creating the problems we were supposed to solve. Creating markets for solutions that certain defense contractors happen to provide. Very profitable markets. James plugged the drive into a hardened tablet. The nuclear material from tonight's operation? It was supposed to be sold to a buyer in Syria. The buyer would then be discovered by American intelligence, leading to a military intervention that would require billions in defense spending. Sarah watched file after file scroll across the tablet screen. Purchase orders, shipping manifests, communication logs between DIA personnel and known weapons dealers. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. How long has this been going on? At least 5 years, possibly longer. Ghost Protocol eliminated several terrorist cells that were actually competing with the operation. We thought we were preventing attacks when we were really eliminating business competition. The comm system crackled with the pilot's voice. Interceptors closing fast, 4 minutes to the border crossing. Through the window, Sarah could see navigation lights in the distance. The F-16s were close enough to be visible, which meant they were close enough to fire missiles if ordered. Why haven't they shot us down yet? Because we're carrying something they want intact. James showed her another section of the tablet, displaying what appeared to be personnel files. The real Ghost Protocol team roster, including the names of Blackwater assets who are still alive and operating under deep cover. Sarah recognized some of the names from their operational briefings, agents she'd thought were dead or missing. They're all still active? They're all gathering evidence for the largest counterintelligence investigation in American history. But only if we can get this data to the right people before Marcus Thompson's people eliminate all the witnesses. The plane banked sharply to the left, following a canyon that would provide cover from radar. Sarah could feel the aircraft straining against the forces of the aggressive maneuvering. Who are the right people? If DIA is compromised, CIA is probably compromised, NSA definitely can't be trusted after what happened with our communications. Congressional Oversight Committee, specifically Senator Catherine Walsh, who chairs the Intelligence Subcommittee and has been investigating defense contractor fraud for 3 years. James brought up a new file showing Walsh's voting record and investigation history. She's clean, her staff is clean, and she has the authority to initiate formal proceedings against anyone involved in this conspiracy. Assuming we can reach her before Marcus's people reach us. The comm system erupted with multiple voices, air traffic control, military command, and what sounded like international aviation authorities, all trying to coordinate their response to an unidentified aircraft approaching the Mexican border.
2 minutes to international airspace, the pilot announced, but we've got company waiting on the other side. Sarah looked at the satellite feed and saw additional aircraft signatures near the border crossing point. Mexican Air Force? Worse, private military contractors. The same people who've been providing security for the arms deals. James began packing the equipment back into travel cases. They're not bound by international law or rules of engagement. The plane dropped even lower, now flying barely 100 feet above the desert floor. Through the windows, Sarah could see the lights of a border town approaching fast. What's the plan when we land? We don't land, at least not in any conventional sense. James pointed toward the cargo bay doors. This aircraft is equipped for low-altitude cargo drops. We're going to parachute into Mexico with the evidence and make our way to a safe house near Tijuana. Sarah stared at him. I haven't done a halo jump in 2 years? It's like riding a bicycle, except if you fall off, you die. James was already suiting up in parachute gear. The alternative is spending the rest of our very short lives in a DIA black site while they fabricate evidence of our terrorist activities. The pilot's voice cut through their conversation. 30 seconds to drop zone. Get ready for rapid deployment. Sarah strapped on the parachute gear with practiced efficiency, despite her hands shaking from adrenaline. The cargo bay doors began opening, revealing the desert landscape rushing past at terrifying speed. What about David Park? Are we just abandoning him? The Park was compromised months ago. Everything he told you tonight was scripted to make you trust him. The real David Park died in Prague. The man you saw tonight was an actor hired to play the role. This revelation hit Sarah harder than she expected. The idea that even her memories of her former handler were now suspect made her question everything she thought she knew about Ghost Protocol. How do I know you're really James Rodriguez? James pulled out a small photograph from his vest pocket, a picture of the two of them taken during a mission in Budapest 3 years ago. But more importantly, he showed her something that couldn't be faked. A scar on his wrist that matched one she'd given him during a training exercise when they'd first been partnered. Because Rebecca Martinez was never supposed to exist. Only James Rodriguez knew that Sarah Chen had a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on her left shoulder blade. Only James Rodriguez knew that you count in prime numbers when you're nervous. And only James Rodriguez knows that you're counting right now. Sarah realized he was right. She'd been silently counting 2, 3, 5, 7, 11 since the fighter jets had appeared on radar. 10 seconds to drop, the pilot announced. James moved to the edge of the cargo bay. The safe house coordinates are programmed into your GPS unit. If we get separated, meet me there in 72 hours. If I don't show up, take the evidence to Senator Walsh and tell her everything. What if neither of us make it? Then Marcus Thompson wins, and the next terrorist attack on American soil will be perpetrated by our own government. James gripped her shoulder. But that's not going to happen, because Sarah Chen is the best operational asset Ghost Protocol ever produced, and she's about to prove it.
The jump light turned green. They leaped into the darkness above the Mexican desert, carrying with them the evidence that could expose the largest intelligence conspiracy in American history. But as Sarah fell through the night sky, watching the cargo plane disappear toward the horizon pursued by fighter jets, she couldn't shake the feeling that even this escape was part of someone else's plan. The question was whose plan, and whether she and James were the heroes or the pawns in a game much larger than either of them understood. Below them, the desert rushed up to meet their parachutes, and somewhere in the darkness, private military contractors were already moving to intercept them. Sarah's parachute touched down in the Sonoran Desert at 3:47 a.m., 30 miles south of the Mexican border, in terrain that looked like the surface of Mars. She hit the ground harder than expected, rolling to absorb impact while scanning for immediate threats. The desert was silent except for wind through scattered cacti and the distant rumble of vehicles approaching from the north. James landed 200 meters away, his chute tangling briefly in a mesquite tree before he managed to cut himself free. Even in the moonlight, Sarah could see blood on his face from a hard landing, but he was moving with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to hostile insertions. "Equipment check," he called out in a low voice that carried just far enough to reach her. Sarah inventoried her gear quickly. The tablet with encrypted evidence was intact in its shockproof case. Her weapon was secure and loaded. The GPS unit showed their position relative to the safe house coordinates, 43 miles southeast through desert terrain that would challenge even experienced operatives. But the approaching vehicle sounds were getting closer, and Sarah could now distinguish at least 3 different engines moving in coordinated search patterns. "We've got company," she whispered into her comm unit. "Private military contractors, just like I predicted. They probably had teams staged along the entire border crossing zone." James was already moving toward a cluster of boulders that would provide cover. "These aren't government agents, which means no rules of engagement. They'll shoot first and fabricate justification later." Sarah followed him toward the rocks, keeping low and moving in the zigzag pattern they'd learned during hostile territory training. The desert offered little concealment, but the moonlight that made them visible also revealed the terrain features they could use for cover. The first vehicle appeared over a ridge about a kilometer away, a modified pickup truck with heavy weapons mounted in the bed and what appeared to be night vision equipment. 2 more vehicles flanked it at intervals designed to prevent escape. "Professional formation," Sarah observed. "These aren't just hired guns. Former special operations, probably. The kind of people who know how to track targets through any terrain." James reached the boulder cluster and immediately began setting up defensive positions. "The question is whether they want us alive or just want the evidence." Sarah checked her tablet's encryption status while taking cover behind a large rock. The device was designed to wipe its memory automatically if tampered with, but she had no idea how sophisticated their pursuers' technical capabilities might be. "How long until backup arrives?" "What backup?" James looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read in the moonlight. "Sarah, we're completely on our own here. No extraction team, no support network, no cavalry coming over the hill." This reality settled on her with an uncomfortable weight. For 3 months as Rebecca Martinez, she'd been alone but safe. Now she was alone and actively hunted by people with military training and unlimited resources. The vehicles had stopped about 500 meters away, and she could see figures deploying from them using infrared scopes and tactical communication equipment. They moved with the coordinated precision of a unit that had worked together extensively. 12 hostiles, James counted, split into 3 fire teams. They're setting up a perimeter to contain us while the primary assault team moves in for capture. Capture, not elimination. Dead people can't provide access codes for encrypted data. James pulled out a device that looked like a modified radio. The device in his hands began picking up radio transmissions from the assault teams. Sarah could hear tactical coordination in accented English, definitely military professionals, but not American. South African, she identified, probably a former Special Forces brigade. Executive out contractors, very expensive, very effective. James was monitoring multiple frequencies. They've been hired to retrieve the evidence and eliminate all witnesses, standard corporate security operation. Sarah realized that her months of hiding in Cedar Falls had left her tactical skills rusty. She was thinking like a janitor trying to avoid trouble instead of an intelligence operative conducting a hostile extraction. We need to change the dynamic. Right now, we're prey hiding from hunters. We need to become hunters ourselves. James smiled for the first time since their reunion. There's the Sarah Chen I remember. What did you have in mind? Sarah studied the terrain between their position and the assault teams. The desert floor was crossed by several arroyos, dry creek beds that would provide concealed movement routes. More importantly, the contractor's formation was designed to contain targets, not defend offensive action. They're expecting us to run or hide. They're not expecting us to attack. Sarah began moving toward the largest arroyo and dropped into it, immediately feeling more secure with solid earth on both sides. Plus, they need us alive, which limits their response options.
James followed her into the creek bed, bringing the radio monitoring equipment. You're assuming they'll stick to non-lethal engagement rules. I'm counting on their professionalism. Elite contractors don't get paid if they damage the merchandise. Sarah began moving along the arroyo toward the contractor's position. But if I'm wrong, we'll find out very quickly. The dry creek bed provided excellent concealment as they moved closer to the assault teams. Sarah could hear radio chatter increasing as the contractors realized their targets weren't where they expected them to be. Team 2 reports status on the north perimeter. No visual contact. Targets may have moved toward the canyon system. Negative. Thermal imaging shows no movement in that sector. Sarah smiled as she listened to their confusion. The contractors were using standard search protocols for conventional targets, but she and James were moving through terrain features that didn't register on their equipment. They reached a position about 200 meters behind the main assault line, close enough to observe individual team members but still concealed by the arroyo walls. The contractors had spread out to search a much larger area, which diluted their effectiveness but also created opportunities. The communications hub is in the center vehicle, James pointed out. Take that out and they lose coordination. Transportation first. Strand them in the desert and they become much more cooperative. Sarah identified the primary threat, a team leader who was directing operations from beside the lead vehicle. Can you create a distraction on the north side? What kind of distraction? Something that draws half their force away from the vehicles. Make it look like we're trying to escape toward the border. James pulled out what appeared to be a small explosive device. Phosphorus flares with a timer delay. It'll create heat signatures that their thermal equipment will interpret as human targets. Perfect. Give me 3 minutes to get into position, then light it up. Sarah left the arroyo and began moving across open ground toward the vehicles, using rocks and sparse vegetation for concealment. Her approach route took her wide around the assault team's positions, but it also exposed her to observation if anyone happened to look in her direction. The contractors were professionals, but they were also operating in unfamiliar territory against targets whose capabilities they'd underestimated. Sarah counted on this overconfidence as she reached the perimeter of their vehicle park. The trucks were high-end tactical vehicles, modified with communication equipment, weapons mounts, and what appeared to be detention facilities in the cargo areas. These people had come prepared for a major operation, not a simple fugitive retrieval. Sarah reached the lead vehicle just as James's distraction activated on the north side of their position. The phosphorus flare created a brilliant light signal that immediately drew the attention of every contractor in the area. Contact north, multiple targets moving toward the border. All teams converge on grid reference 7-4 Alpha. 8 of the 12 contractors immediately began moving toward the false target, leaving only skeleton crews with the vehicles. Sarah waited until the responding teams were committed to their movement, then began her own operation. The communication equipment was more sophisticated than she'd expected. Military-grade encryption, satellite uplinks, and what appeared to be direct connections to intelligence databases. But the physical security was standard commercial grade, designed to prevent theft rather than sabotage. Sarah used techniques learned during Ghost Protocol training to disable the communication array without creating obvious evidence of sabotage. To casual observation, the equipment would appear to be suffering technical malfunctions rather than deliberate interference. The vehicles presented a different challenge. Simply disabling engines would be obvious and might prompt the contractors to call for backup transportation. Instead, Sarah focused on more subtle sabotage, GPS systems, fuel lines, and cooling systems that would fail gradually rather than immediately. She was working on the second vehicle when footsteps approached from her blind spot. Sarah froze, realizing she'd been so focused on the technical aspects of sabotage that she'd stopped monitoring her surroundings. Step away from the vehicle with your hands visible. The voice belonged to someone who'd stayed behind to guard the equipment, a mistake in her tactical assessment that could prove fatal. Sarah slowly raised her hands while calculating angles and distances. Turn around slowly. Sarah complied and found herself facing a woman in tactical gear who looked remarkably familiar. It took her a moment to place the face, but when she did, everything about the current situation became much more complicated. "Hello, Sarah. It's been a long time." The woman holding a rifle on her was Lisa Kovac, a former Ghost Protocol operative who'd supposedly been killed in Afghanistan 18 months ago. But she was very much alive, very much armed, and apparently working for the people trying to capture them. "Lisa, I thought you were dead." "I was supposed to be. We all were." Lisa kept her weapon trained on Sarah while speaking into a throat microphone. "Package secured, returning to base." Sarah realized that James's intelligence about Ghost Protocol survivors had been incomplete. Some of their former teammates weren't just alive, they'd been turned, recruited by the very conspiracy they'd once fought against.
"Why?" Sarah asked. "Why betray everything we worked for?" "Because everything we worked for was a lie." Lisa's voice carried a bitterness that Sarah had never heard before. Ghost Protocol was never about protecting America. It was about protecting profits. The only difference between us and the people we were hunting was which side of the transaction we were on. Sarah could hear vehicles approaching as the other contractors returned from James's distraction. In a few minutes, they'd realized the communication equipment had been sabotaged and would begin a much more thorough search. "Where's James?" "Being detained by my colleagues. He put up quite a fight, but ultimately there were too many of us." Lisa gestured toward the approaching vehicles. "The question is whether you're going to come quietly or make this difficult for everyone." Sarah calculated her odds of disarming Lisa and reaching cover before the other contractors arrived. The numbers weren't encouraging, but surrender meant certain death once they'd extracted the information they needed. "I have a better question," Sarah said. "Do you really think they're going to let you live once this operation is complete?" For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Lisa's face. It was the opening Sarah needed. She dove toward the nearest vehicle as automatic weapons fire erupted around her position, but this wasn't the random shooting of panicked amateurs. The contractors were firing to wound and capture, not kill, which gave her a tactical advantage she intended to exploit. The real battle for the evidence was just beginning. Sarah rolled behind the armored vehicle as bullets sparked off the metal inches from her head. The contractors were closing in from 3 directions, but their tactical discipline was working against them. They couldn't risk damaging the evidence she carried, which meant every shot had to be carefully placed. Lisa's voice cut through the gunfire. "Sarah, this is pointless. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and I guarantee you'll be treated according to international conventions." "How you treated our team in Bucharest?" Sarah called back while checking the tablet's security protocols. If capture became inevitable, she could trigger a complete data wipe, but that would also destroy the only evidence capable of exposing the conspiracy. Bucharest was necessary. The entire program was compromised. We were being used as assassins for corporate interests while thinking we were protecting national security. Sarah realized that Lisa genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, which made her more dangerous than any mercenary motivated purely by money. True believers were willing to sacrifice anything for their cause, including former friends. Movement to her left caught her attention. James, bloodied but conscious, being escorted by 2 contractors toward the vehicles. He was walking under his own power, which suggested they hadn't seriously injured him yet. But his hands were zip-tied behind his back, and one of his guards was carrying what appeared to be interrogation equipment. The sight of her partner in custody crystallized Sarah's decision. She activated the tablet's emergency transmission protocol, uploading the encrypted evidence to multiple secure servers simultaneously. The process would take 90 seconds, during which she had to keep the device active and protected. "Lisa, I'm sending you something that might change your perspective on who the real enemy is." Sarah triggered a localized data burst that transmitted selected files to Lisa's tactical communication system. The files contained bank records showing payments to executive outcomes contractors for operations that had resulted in Ghost Protocol casualties. The shooting stopped abruptly as Lisa accessed the transmitted data. Sarah could hear her former teammate's sharp intake of breath as she processed the financial evidence. These payments, they're dated 3 days before the Bucharest operation.
Executive Outcomes was hired to eliminate Ghost Protocol personnel before we could expose the arms-dealing conspiracy. You're not working for the good guys, Lisa. You're working for the people who ordered our deaths. Sarah realized that Lisa genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, which made her more dangerous than any mercenary motivated purely by money. True believers were willing to sacrifice anything for their cause, including former friends. Movement to her left caught her attention. James, bloodied but conscious, being escorted by two contractors toward the vehicles. He was walking under his own power, which suggested they hadn't seriously injured him yet. But his hands were zip-tied behind his back, and one of his guards was carrying what appeared to be interrogation equipment. The sight of her partner in custody crystallized Sarah's decision. She activated the tablet's emergency transmission protocol, uploading the encrypted evidence to multiple secure servers simultaneously. The process would take 90 seconds, during which she had to keep the device active and protected. Lisa, I'm sending you something that might change your perspective on who the real enemy is. Sarah triggered a localized data burst that transmitted selected files to Lisa's tactical communication system. The files contained bank records showing payments to Executive Outcomes contractors for operations that had resulted in Ghost Protocol casualties. The shooting stopped abruptly as Lisa accessed the transmitted data. Sarah could hear her former teammates' sharp intake of breath as she processed the financial evidence. These payments, they're dated 3 days before the Bucharest operation. Executive Outcomes was hired to eliminate Ghost Protocol personnel before we could expose the arms-dealing conspiracy. You're not working for the good guys, Lisa. You're working for the people who ordered our deaths. The silence stretched long enough for Sarah to complete the evidence upload. Multiple confirmation signals indicated successful transmission to servers in Switzerland, Iceland, and Singapore, countries with strong data protection laws and government connections to Senator Walsh's Oversight Committee. Lisa's voice, when it came, carried a different tone entirely. Sarah, if what you're showing me is accurate, then You've been manipulated into betraying everything we fought for. The question is what you're going to do about it. The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted their conversation. I recognized the distinctive rotor signature of military aircraft. Not the civilian contractors' equipment, but actual military assets. The situation was about to become much more complicated. Federal agents, amplified voices announced from the aircraft. This is Joint Task Force Alpha. All personnel will lay down weapons and submit to detention immediately. Sarah realized that Marcus Thompson had escalated the operation, calling in official military assets to ensure no witnesses survived to testify about the conspiracy. The contractors around her were looking nervously at the sky, clearly not expecting this development. Lisa's radio crackled with urgent communications from her team leader. Kovac, what's your status? We need immediate extraction before federal assets arrive. Negative, Lisa responded, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. I'm reviewing additional intelligence that changes our operational parameters. That's not your decision to make. Extract the package and return to base immediately. Sarah watched Lisa's face in the moonlight as her former teammate weighed loyalty against evidence. The helicopters were circling closer, their searchlights beginning to sweep the desert floor. Lisa, those federal agents aren't here to arrest the contractors. They're here to eliminate everyone who knows about this operation, including you. Sarah kept her voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. Marcus Thompson needs this entire incident to disappear, which means no witnesses and no evidence.
The first helicopter began its descent toward a flat area near the vehicles. Sarah could see tactical teams preparing to fast rope down, their equipment suggesting they were prepared for immediate lethal action rather than arrest and detention. Lisa made her decision. All Executive Outcomes personnel, this is Team Leader Kovac. Abort current mission and withdraw immediately. We've been compromised. Negative, Kovac. You're not in command of this operation. I'm invoking Article 7 of our contract. Client has provided false intelligence regarding mission parameters. Executive Outcomes is terminating engagement. Lisa cut her radio connection and moved towards Sarah's position. The contractors will withdraw, but those federal assets won't. They're here to clean up loose ends, including us, especially us. Dead Ghost Protocol operatives can't testify before congressional committees. Lisa began cutting Sarah's zip tie restraints. Where's the evidence? Already uploaded to secure servers with instructions for automatic release if I don't check in every 12 hours. Sarah rubbed feeling back into her wrists. Even if they eliminate us, the truth will come out. The helicopters had landed, and tactical teams were deploying with the efficiency of elite military units. But these weren't standard federal agents. Their equipment and tactics suggested special operations personnel operating under classified authority. They're going to kill the contractors too, Lisa observed. Can't have witnesses who might testify about being hired for an illegal operation. Sarah watched as the executive outcomes personnel began withdrawing toward their vehicles, clearly recognizing the threat posed by the incoming federal teams. But their escape routes were already being cut off by additional aircraft arriving from the north. James is still in their custody. Then we better move fast. Lisa handed Sarah a submachine gun from her tactical kit. There's a reason Executive Outcomes charges premium rates. We are very good at tactical extractions under hostile conditions. They moved toward the vehicles where James was being held, using the confusion of multiple forces deploying simultaneously to mask their approach. The contractors guarding him were focused on the federal teams, not expecting an attack from their own personnel. Sarah reached James first, cutting his restraints while Lisa provided covering fire against federal agents who had spotted their movement. Her partner was conscious but disoriented from what appeared to be interrogation drugs. "Can you move? I can fight." James accepted the pistol Lisa handed him. "What's our extraction plan?" "We don't have one. This is purely survival now." Sarah helped him toward cover as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. "The evidence is uploaded. Our job is to stay alive long enough for it to reach the right people." The desert had become a three-way battlefield between Executive Outcomes contractors, federal tactical teams, and the 3 Ghost Protocol survivors. But the federal teams had superior numbers and equipment, systematically eliminating the contractors while pursuing Sarah's group. "Vehicle," Lisa pointed toward, an abandoned Executive Outcomes truck that still appeared functional. 50 meters. They fought their way across open ground under heavy fire, using military tactics learned during years of classified operations. Sarah felt the familiar adrenaline focus of combat, her civilian months in Cedar Falls falling away like a discarded disguise. The truck's engine started on the first try, and Lisa drove with the aggressive skill of someone trained in hostile territory operations. Behind them, the federal teams were commandeering contractors' vehicles for pursuit. "Border crossing is 12 miles north," James announced, checking GPS coordinates. "We're not going north." Lisa turned the vehicle east toward mountains that appeared as dark shapes against the star-filled sky. "There's an emergency services extraction point 20 miles southeast. If we can reach it, we can contact Senator Walsh directly." Sarah monitored their pursuers through the truck's rear window. Multiple vehicles with military-grade equipment, coordinated pursuit patterns, and the persistence that suggested this operation had official authorization at the highest levels. How do we know the extraction point isn't compromised? Because it's not an official site. It's a backup facility that Executive Outcomes established for situations exactly like this one. Emergency Services is a private intelligence firm that specializes in protecting whistleblowers from government retaliation. The name was familiar to Sarah from her intelligence training. Emergency Services operated in the gray area between legal and illegal, providing protection for people whose testimony threatened powerful interests. They were expensive, discreet, and absolutely reliable. Assuming we can reach them before the federal teams catch up, that's where superior tactical training becomes relevant. Executive Outcomes doesn't just teach assault tactics. We also teach evasion, survival, and escape techniques. The truck hit a hidden arroyo and went airborne for several terrifying seconds before landing hard on the far side. Through the rear window, Sarah could see their pursuers falling behind as they struggled with the difficult terrain. James was monitoring radio frequencies, picking up increasingly urgent communications from the federal teams. They're calling in air support, Apache helicopters en route from Nellis Air Force Base. ETA, 20 minutes. Lisa pushed the truck harder, navigating by memory and instinct through landscapes that looked identical in every direction. Sarah realized that her former teammate possessed knowledge and skills that went far beyond their original Ghost Protocol training. "How long have you been working with emergency services?" "Since 3 days after the Bucharest attack. They extracted me from a Romanian hospital where I was supposed to die from my injuries." Lisa's voice carried old anger. "They've been investigating the Ghost Protocol conspiracy for over a year, gathering evidence and protecting survivors." Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "The evidence I uploaded tonight, it's going to emergency services, not just Senator Walsh. Emergency services has been building the case that will destroy this conspiracy. Your evidence completes the chain of proof they need to trigger congressional investigations, criminal prosecutions, and international intelligence cooperation." The extraction point appeared as a cluster of lights in a valley between two mountain ridges. As they approached, Sarah could see it was a substantial facility. Landing pads for aircraft, secure communication equipment, and what appeared to be defensive positions manned by professional security personnel. "Emergency services don't take chances," Lisa explained as they were waved through multiple security checkpoints. "Their clients include heads of state, corporate executives, and intelligence operatives whose testimony can change history." The truck stopped beside a communications center where technicians were already processing Sarah's uploaded evidence. She could see her files being analyzed, cross-referenced with other intelligence, and prepared for presentation to congressional oversight committees. "Agent Chen?" A woman in civilian clothes approached their vehicle. "I'm Director Rachel Morrison, Emergency Services. Senator Walsh is standing by for your testimony via secure video link." Sarah looked at James and Lisa, her former teammates who had survived betrayal, conspiracy, and assassination attempts to reach this moment. The quiet life of Rebecca Martinez was gone forever, but Sarah Chen was about to expose the truth that would protect other intelligence operatives from suffering the same betrayal. Let's end this. As dawn broke over the Sonoran Desert, Sarah began her testimony to Senator Walsh's Intelligence Subcommittee. The evidence she and James had gathered would trigger the largest intelligence scandal in American history, leading to criminal prosecutions, congressional hearings, and reforms that would prevent future Ghost Protocol conspiracies. Marcus Thompson was arrested at his DIA office 6 hours later, along with 14 other intelligence officials and defense contractors involved in the arms dealing operation. The executive outcomes contractors were granted immunity in exchange for testimony about their illegal contracts. But most importantly, the Ghost Protocol survivors were officially reinstated with full honors, their service records corrected, and their sacrifices finally acknowledged by the government that they had served faithfully despite betrayal at the highest levels. Sarah Chen never returned to Cedar Falls, Nevada. Rebecca Martinez had served her purpose as a cover identity, but Sarah had more important work to do helping emergency services protect other whistleblowers whose testimony could save lives and preserve democracy. The toolbox with Ghost Protocol stamped on its side became evidence in federal court, but its real significance was as a reminder that some secrets are too important to stay buried, and some people are willing to risk everything to ensure the truth eventually comes to light. In a small hangar in Nevada, the truth had finally caught up with those who thought they could kill it.